Tell me why they braved the hardships of a strange and distant shore. They loved their native homeland. Did they love their freedom more? So many hands from a dozen lands far across the sea worked and tried, fought and died to make this country free. Oh, some who came were timid, and some were bold and rash, and some came here in chains beneath the slaver's lash. But some came here to get away from chains of a different kind. They came to find their freedom from tyrants of the mind. For they'd been told exactly what to think and how to pray. But they were independent, they just had to get away. To a dream, to America, where freedom was the goal. Where a man might own his own soul. Where a man might own his own soul.
Long ago, the winds came down from the north, and the rivers of ice, the silent, massive glaciers, followed, crushing all before them. And after the wind and the ice and the swirling snow came man. Man stumbling over the hard rock, moving down into the green land where he found food. Our story is man in America. How he came here, what he found here, what he did in this wonderful new continent. For this season, we're going to explore America's past. We'll look at how the land was formed in those long years before man arrived. We'll see how those first primitive settlers strayed into the new continent. We'll watch the European explorers as they discover, by accident, pieces of the New World. We'll see the setting up of the American colonies and the development of those colonies into a new nation. We'll watch as that young nation is threatened by civil war and foreign war, and then see it grow and prosper as more immigrants pour in and thousands moved westward. All these things we'll see, the great events and the great people who carved our nation. And perhaps by studying our past, we'll come to better understand what made us the way we are now. So first, we go back, way back to the beginning of our story, back to that empty America before the first prehistoric settlers came, back to a land that, for the rest of the world, was to remain unknown and unexplored for another 15,000 years. What was it like? What waited for the first hungry explorer in the New World? It was a strip of land 4,000 miles wide, bordered by two of the world's great oceans, deserts and jungles, mountains and plains, the untouched lands of the Western Hemisphere. The northernmost of these two great continents carried a ridge of mountains stretching 4,000 miles along its western edge. In the east, a low, narrow line of broken rocks and natural harbors. The central lowlands, a rich, fertile plain, 3,000 miles long and more than 1,000 miles wide. A plain destined to become a nation's breadbasket. More than half of these plains had been covered by a massive sheet of ice. A glacier whose thickness in places could swallow 9 Empire State Buildings standing one on top of the other. This glacier was like an enormous sponge and absorbed tons of water from the oceans. It's believed that the level of the oceans dropped as much as 200 to 300 feet, extending the boundaries of the continents by many miles. As the ocean of ice moved across the land, it pushed aside everything in its path, and its slow, grinding journey worked wonders on the land. It picked up huge blocks of stone, weighing as much as 10,000 tons, deposited them hundreds of miles away on lands completely alien to their species. At its melting edge, it left the mighty river valleys deep in the heart of the continent. the Ohio, Missouri, the Yukon, and the St. Lawrence. In the east, where the crust of the earth was old, hard, and stable, it left gentle rolling hills and low-lying plateaus. In the short distance between Washington and New York, it left a natural access inland, the Hudson-Mohawk Gap. Through this gap, the rivers famous in our history find their way to the sea. In the west, along the Pacific coast, something very different was happening. Violent earthquakes shook the land from Alaska to the Straits of Magellan. And the chain of young mountains continued its steady rise above the continental plain. As they rose, the relentless sea chewed away at their base, carving cliffs, washing the sand out of shallow inlets. The land trembled and waited and then trembled again. 1,000 years passed, then another and another. 1,000 years is a very short time in the history of the world. At the time our prehistoric hunters reached the Bering Sea, the glaciers covered most of North America. And as those ice rivers absorbed water from the sea, they lowered the water level of the oceans and left exposed a bridge of land connecting the Asian and American continents. Across this bridge wandered the animal herds, and following behind them came man, entering for the first time the Western Hemisphere. Asia, then, was the great pitcher, and from this pitcher poured the life that was to make the Western Hemisphere more than a playland of animals. Up through Asia and over the top of the continent, man came along time's first superhighway. The animals following instinctively the search for food, the lush and abundant grasslands. Man following his source of food, his source of warmth and shelter, the great woolly beast. Along the rich valley of the Yukon and Mackenzie rivers, his spear points are found mingled with the bones of mastodon, bison, camel, horse, and the extinct jaguar, once called the Alaskan lion. The parting of the glacier left a corridor hundreds of miles wide down through Canada into the land now known as the United States. Thousands upon thousands of years transformed the great glaciers back into the waters of the sea. As the ice melted, the oceans of the world rose to cover the bridge into the continent and seal off man forever in the New World. The next visitors would have to come over water and perhaps get their feet wet. The thousands upon thousands of years that transformed the glaciers back into the waters of the sea also transformed our Asian visitors into the races of North and South America. The Eskimoan, ranging the entire Arctic Circle. The great Athapascan, who roamed from Alaska to the Hudson Bay and southward into Arizona, New Mexico, and western Texas. The Algonquin, spanning southern Canada from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic, among the Great Lakes, and some as far down as Tennessee. The Iroquoian, filling the Northeast. The proud Sioux of the Great Plains, coming as far east as the Carolinas and Virginia. The Shoshone of the Great Basin in northern Texas. They were to go on to establish the sophisticated empires of Mexico, South and Central America, the Olmec, Mayan, Aztec, and Incan, which would dazzle the eyes of the conquistadores. His agricultural products were many, and they were completely unknown to the outside world until early explorers brought them back to Europe. To name just a few, he had Indian corn, pumpkins, peanuts, potatoes, tomatoes, and chocolate. He raised exotic fruits such as strawberries and pineapples and avocados. He learned how to clean the deadly poison from the manioc bush and then used the cleansed plant for making tapioca and bread. Although many of these things did grow wild, he learned to cultivate them as well. As the struggle for survival became less difficult, man became a highly intelligent and creative farmer, a craftsman, a builder, and a traveler. But where was his horse, you will ask? Where was this noble animal who played such a vital role in our country's history? Actually, the prehistoric horse had disappeared from the American continent thousands of years before. Why? No one quite knows. But this earliest American settler, the ancestor of the American Indian, had no horse to carry his burdens, no oxen to pull his plow, no cows to milk, and no wheels to ease his labor. But he was one of 200,000 souls who occupied what's now the territory of the United States. And this group were the lords of more than 800 million acres of the richest timberland in the world. Pines of every variety grew across the land from sea to sea, and in the forests of the south were the beautiful hardwood trees. In the west, a great family of fir trees towered hundreds of feet up into the sunlight. Forests so thick that only ferns and mosses and other shade-loving plants grew on the dark floor at their feet. Off the New England coast, in the shallow waters known as Grand Bank, the sea would turn white with millions of thrashing fish. You could throw out a basket and bring it back full. Millions of buffalo roamed the plains, feeding beside the antelope, the deer, and the prongbuck. His woods were alive with the little woolly creatures that were to make the rich ladies of Europe warm and gorgeous: the otter, the mink, the beaver, the muskrat, and the fox. Along the Pacific coast, huge sea lions sunned themselves, instinctively knowing that hunters were few and far away. The bear, larger and more ferocious than his Asian brother, fished his streams from Maine to California. This was the kingdom of the noble savage, whose days were long with hunting, who slept deeply through the night in his buffalo tent on his bearskin. He was secure in the knowledge that there was enough for all. Time wouldn't let him sleep long. Soon out of the east, like mice smelling at a great cheese, the Vikings came nibbling at the coast of the virgin land. In the year 999, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, would find the shores of a land rich in timber, where grapes and wheat grew wild in abundance, a land he called Vineland the Good. The blood-hungry Vikings who had left a trail of death and piracy along the coasts of Europe. Viking ships found in the mud off the Norwegian coast had the lines of an American Cup defender, and with a good breeze could travel 150 miles a day. Their two great loves were war and the sea. Their very names struck terror into the hearts of men. Eric Bloodaxe, Harold Bluetooth, Thorkill the Skull Splitter. Others would come. Curiously and cautiously, they would picket the coast. But it would take more than curiosity and caution to tame such a wild continent. For another 400 years, the Indians could sleep undisturbed in their abundant land. Back in the bustling capitals of Europe, the New World was just a strange rumor, a traveler's tall tale not to be taken seriously. All that lay beyond the European shore was wild ocean, stretching to a limitless sky. Europe was occupied with a great cause, the Crusades, the holy wars that would last over 200 years. Kings, princes, and knights from all over Europe marched forward on this religious mission to free Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Merchants joined the Crusades and brought back profit and prosperity to the Italian trading cities. Spices, black pepper, ginger, cloves, and nutmeg from the lands of the eastern Mediterranean introduced to the Europeans a new way of making food edible. Meat and vegetables that would sour and spoil could now be preserved, or at least the taste would not be unpleasant. The great demand for spices opened a new trade with the East. The fever of riches to the East spread with wild excitement from the publishing of a book, The Adventures of Marco Polo. Marco Polo, a merchant traveler from Venice, told Europe of the great Kublai Khan's empire. With walls of silver, roofs of gold, masses of pearls, diamonds, and rubies. Marco Polo had been away for 24 years, traveling the richest of the lands to the east, China. In the capable hands of Marco Polo and men like him, trade with the East flourished. A passport from the great Khan, picked up on the Black Sea, would take a merchant safely through Asia to China on the shores of the Pacific. Early in the 14th century, the Khan died, and the free passage to the East ended as abruptly as it began. The Khan's sons fought among themselves for the empire, and the Ottoman Turks, taking advantage of the Mongols' troubles, went on a rampage in Asia. They sacked the city of Palestine, the major port of the spice trade, and by 1450 had taken Constantinople. The peoples of Europe would have to find a new road to the riches of the East, for a massive wall of hostile Turks now stood across all the land routes. Wealth and fame awaited the man who found a sea route to the Orient, and undreamed of power for the nation whose flag he carried. The Italians had the seafaring tradition, and now that the Mediterranean was closed, they would furnish the sailors for the Atlantic countries for years to come. The disciples of Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal pushed their way along the coast of Africa, searching a passage east to India and China. One of them, Bartholomew Diaz, in 1486, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, but found that another ocean stood between him and the riches of the Orient. In Italy, a bolder man stepped forward, Christopher Columbus, and said that by sailing west, the coast of Asia could be achieved. He left his native Genoa and found an ear at the Spanish court. The Queen herself, Isabella, would finance him in the name of Spain. And Christopher Columbus would convert the great Khans of China to Christianity and break the Mohammedan stranglehold on the riches of Asia. His countrymen in Italy said he was mad. To the west lay frightening emptiness, the edge of the earth with sea monsters. But it was an age of madness when the impossible was coming to pass every day. On the 3rd day of August in the year 1492, Columbus, in charge of 3 ships, set out on the voyage that was to change the course of history.
This man from Genoa, Italy, whom many believed obsessed, said, I can reach the coast of Asia in a way that might amaze you by sailing west. It was a dream he'd always had since he was a little lad, and though folks thought him slightly mad at best, he was determined to make the test. To the court of Spain he came, Christopher Columbus, that was his name. To Ferdinand, Isabella too, he pleaded for his ships and crew. So Queen Isabella finally agreed, gave him the ships, bid him Godspeed, on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria too. But soon there was complaining and grumbling by the crew, on the Nina and the Pinta and the Santa Maria too. They urged their chief to turn back before all hope was gone. He replied, sail on, sail on. On the 68th day they agreed without fail that they would sail for 3 days more. And Columbus knew if they didn't sight shore, his lifelong dreams would be lost and gone, and never again could he cry, sail on. October 12th, in the bright moon glow, he wondered what the dawn would show. Just then they heard the lookout shout. There was no longer any doubt, for there close at hand was land. There in the boat, heading for the shore, Columbus thought he'd found the Indies he was looking for. West Indian breezes blowing, the Spanish flag unfurled. Columbus, without knowing, had found a new world.
Columbus knew that this wasn't the land of gold and spices. This wasn't Marco Polo's land of golden temples with lords and ladies dressed in silk and rich brocade. Naked savages met him on the beach, and after some gifts of bells and trinkets, told him of other lands that were rich in gold and jewels further to the south and west. The search that Columbus thought had ended with his discovery of land was for him only beginning. And for 3 more months, his tiny ships would cruise from island to island, always meeting disappointment. But at each, the natives would tell him of still other islands which were further to the west or to the south. Finally, in December, Columbus discovered the island of Haiti, and there the natives who met him were wearing jeweled gold. These simple natives exchanged their treasures for the bells and trinkets that the Spaniards had brought with them for barter. And it was this that saved Columbus and his discoveries from complete scorn when he returned to Spain. When he did return home, he announced the discovery of the islands south of India. But the rejoicing in Spain turned to dismay when it was learned that he had made no contact with the great Khans, and his ships carried no spices. It would take Columbus 3 more voyages to realize that he had discovered a new world.
Those who came before us worked with willing hands, though they all came to this country from a dozen different lands, to follow a dream to America, where freedom was the goal, where a man might own his own soul, where a man might own his own soul. A nation of immigrants, a nation of immigrants, built this land of opportunity. Descendants of immigrants, of hard-working immigrants. Are we a nation of immigrants? Are we